Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the Dnipro direction. I'll remind you that several days ago we were talking about very interesting article that was published by the neutral resources. And according to them, there is information that the Russians are trying to concentrate their forces along the Kinburn Spit. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian resources, currently the Russians are trying to establish complete control over these islands in front of the settlement by the name of Kizomis. We discussed this concentration of forces, and today the Ukrainians published this video. And in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of the Kinburn Spit with drones and with artillery. So which most likely is some sort of proof that the Russians indeed are trying to concentrate their forces. As for now, it's very difficult to understand what exactly the Russians are planning to do. Either the Russians are planning to cross the Dnipro estuary and to take under control several settlements on the Ukrainian side, or the Russians are preparing themselves before possible Ukraine attempts to attack with the purpose to land infantry in this part of the Kherson direction. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But as for other places of the Dnipro direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received a lot of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro. A lot of explosions, and we see that the Russians resumed their, let's say, attacks on the Ukrainian positions. I'll remind you that the same thing we already saw last year, because during the spring, summer and early autumn period, the Russian activities, aviation activities, is very high. During winter period of time, the Russians reduced their aviation activity. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have already discussed the situation in this region. I'll remind you that during the previous days, the Russians shown us very big, dynamic, very fast dynamic in this area. The Russians were advancing, and as a result of attacks during the previous several days, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take under control lots of territories in front of the settlement by the name of Zeleno Pole. So according to different sources, this is approximately the territory that is already under complete Russian control. And we see that the Russians are trying to advance further in the northwestern direction with the purpose to get as close as possible to the main supply lines that Ukrainians use to support their forces on the territory of the settlements of Zeleno Pole and Novopole. As for these two villages, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked these villages heavily with FABs, with aviation. Lots of explosions, lots of temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine were destroyed. So due to these activities and due to these strikes, we made the conclusion that most likely the Russians are planning to attack the settlements of Novopole and Zeleno Pole in the very near future. This will allow the Russians to maintain their positions and to improve their foothold on the Ukrainian side of the road of 510. And from this bridgehead, the Russians most likely will continue advancing further in the northwestern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over this significant number of villages. So there are lots of small villages, and this is the primary target for the Russians. Now let's move further. As for the settlement of Bugatti, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians established complete control over the main supply and support roads, and this is very important piece of news, because now we see that Ukrainians most likely are waiting. So from moment to moment, from any moment to any second, most likely the head of Ukraine army, Syrsky, will order these troops to surrender, or not surrender, but to fall back. So that is why the Russians try to establish complete control over the main evacuation and supply lines. Now let's talk about the Dnipro direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos and we received lots of changes on the ground. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to answer the settlement of Kotliarivka. We have this video that confirmed the situation. In this video that was published by the Russians, we can see how Russian troopers were crossing fields from one settlement to another without any support of vehicles, tanks or motorcycles. The Russians just on their own were crossing the fields and accumulating and concentrating creating a critical mass along the eastern part of the settlement of Kotliarivka. In this video we can see how the Russians were moving from this tree line in the direction of the tree line on the eastern part of Kotliarivka just with troopers. So the Russians crossed and concentrated themselves in this area. As for the end of the 1st of May of 2025, we haven't received anything regarding clashes on the ground. Most likely there are very heavy clashes for the territory of the settlement. Several reports we got yesterday, and most likely during the next several days we're going to receive additional details, and then we will decide whether to make changes on the ground or not. At the same time, the Russians, according to information we have, made several attempts to attack the settlement of Troitska from the north. I'll remind you that according to different sources during the previous days, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this tree line. But later, several sources reported that Ukrainians counterattacked the Russians in this area and restored control over this tree line. And we have video that confirm this. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians, after they managed to recapture this tree line, were under very heavy fire from the Russian artillery. The Russians in this video, as you can see, were bombing and attacking positions, vehicles and equipment of the armored forces of Ukraine in the most southern part of this tree line. Currently, the Russians, as we can see, are about to begin offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Troitska, which is very important and which is obviously a part of Russian media victory about entering of the Dnipro direction. As for the Dnipro direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, we got several videos where we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Nova Pavlovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue advancing from the settlement of Uspenovka in the western direction, and the Russians continue their attempts to attack in the direction of Novosergeyevka. There are very heavy clashes for this square. As for the settlement of Nova Alexandriivka, according to several mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory during the previous 24 hours. As for the end of the 4th of May of 2025, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation still haven't confirmed this information. As for the settlement of Novosergeyevka, we have adjusted the map, as you can see, but we adjusted the map based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russians on the eastern part of the settlement of Novosergeyevka. We can see how the Ukrainians landed and began attack with the purpose to restore control over the eastern part of the settlement. This video at this very moment was geolocated exactly in this point, and based on this video we came to conclusion that everything to the east of this point is already under complete Russian control. So basically on the position of landing of Ukrainians, we came to conclusion that everything to the east is under complete Russian control, so that is why we made these changes on the ground. As for the Sergeyevka direction, during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to restore control over these facilities. These facilities used to be under complete Ukrainian control, but telling the truth, since the beginning of battle for this territory, probably these facilities changed their owner for hundreds of times. Probably 100 times the Russians controlled this area, another 100 times this territory was under complete Ukrainian control. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction. There are lots of icons along M32 road. The Russians continued their offensive operation, and during the 4th of May we got lots of important updates. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours the Russians improved their positions along M32 road, and according to different sources the Russians both answered the village of Novopoltavka, and currently there are very heavy clashes for the southern outskirts of the settlement. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions, and the Russians began assault operation on the company's stronghold that is located in the central part of this territory. I'll remind you that there is a very big, very powerful, dense network of the fortifications that Ukrainians are trying to control, no matter the price they're going to pay for this. And this is also a primary target for the Russians, because if the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory, then the Russians will be able to create a very powerful foothold, very important stronghold, and most likely the Ukrainians will lose any chances to counterattack the Russians in their western flank while the Russians are advancing in the direction of the Kliban-Byksky pocket. Now let's discuss the situation in this pocket. We have lots of important updates. During the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Alexandra. This information was provided by neutral mappers and by pro-Ukrainian sources. But when talking about pro-Ukrainian sources, we see that most of the territories between Tarasovka, Zelene Pole and Alexandropol are considered as a gray zone or contested area. So according to pro-Ukrainian sources, this territory is no longer belong to Ukrainians, Ukrainians, they don't have strong control over this territory. Once again, let's take a look at this map. So huge area of contested area. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation or as a result of several attacks, the Russians managed to answer the southwestern and the southern part of the settlement, and most likely these farms are already under complete Russian control. So summarizing everything, by the end of the 4th of April of 2025, the Russians, according to several pro-Russian resources, already established complete control over everything that is located inside of this red line. As for geolocations, we have just one video where we can see how the Ukrainians on the most eastern part of the settlement were trying to answer the village itself. So the Ukrainians currently have no possibilities to use vehicles to bring additional forces to the territory of the settlement with the purpose to stabilize or repel another Russian attack. They can do this just on their own, but as you can see, as soon as Ukrainians answered the village, the Russians attacked them with FPV drones. So basically, the Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory. The Ukrainians have no chances and no possibilities to introduce additional forces on the ground, which means that either if the Russians haven't established complete control over this territory, they would be able to do this probably during the next 24 or 48 hours. Now let's move to the central Kliban-Bykska direction. As you can see, we have changes on the ground. I'll remind you that several mappers and several resources have adjusted their maps in this area probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, but without any geolocations, without any proofs. And today we got first geolocation that confirms Russian control over this territory. This video was published by the Ukrainian side, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning Russians to the south of Stara Nikolaevka. There are lots of episodes, lots of FPV drone attacks on Russian positions, Russian vehicles, Russian equipment, and many other things and constructions. And one of the episodes of this video was geolocated exactly in this point. Ukrainian FPV drone attacked Russian soldier who was located exactly in this area. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we came to the conclusion that indeed the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer the settlement of Stara Nikolaevka itself, and currently there are very heavy clashes for this village. During the next several days, we're going to receive additional updates, and most likely the villages will fall in the very near future, because once again the Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory, and the Russians established complete artillery control. Ukrainians lose their capabilities to bring additional forces and to introduce additional units along the line of combat contact. The Ukrainians are trying to fight with forces they have in this direction, which means that the only purpose they have is to hold their lines for as long as possible. But most likely the Ukrainians understand that this is inevitable. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, Ukrainian asynchronous published video. We will not watch this video because there are lots of casualties, lots of violence, and Ukrainians reported that most likely this video took place on the territory of the settlement by the name of Nilipovka. We added this icon softly, but once again, for the first time since the breakthrough in this area, the pro-Ukrainian sources published a video where we might see the Russian soldiers on the territory of this settlement. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Chesa direction. As for this territory, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians are bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine along the entire line of combat contact, but without any changes on the ground. And most likely before the beginning of the 9th of May and May holidays, the Russians will not be able to establish complete control over the central citadel. Most likely the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation. The Russians are regrouping. Maybe the Russians will resume their attempts to attack after the 9th of May. As for the Sivas direction, the Russians, they were completely concentrated on artillery fire. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were trying to destroy as many as possible temporary deployment points, and the most important, the Russians were trying to destroy for as many as possible positions of FPV drone operators. The Russians, as we know, currently are trying to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Grifka. There are very heavy clashes for the eastern outskirts of the settlement. As for the current situation, we don't know whether the Russians managed to improve their positions or not. One thing we know for sure, that there are very heavy clashes and that Ukrainians are trying to counterattack with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But due to this artillery focus and artillery fire, we believe that Ukrainians haven't managed to stabilize the situation. Most likely in the very near future, they would be forced to fall back from the settlement of Grigorivka towards the village by the name of Serebryanka. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Leman direction, where the Russians, according to information we have during the previous 24 hours, managed to improve their positions around this Leman flower. According to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the settlement of Novomikhailivka and in the direction of the settlement of Zelene Polye. We see that the Russian stronghold, the Russian foothold in this area is getting stronger and stronger every single day. Every single day, the Russians are getting closer and closer to more temporary deployment points and positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. Currently, we see, due to the geolocations and due to several changes on the ground, that most likely the Russians, before the beginning of their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Leman, the Russians decided to establish complete control over this territory. Let's say the territory between the river of Nitrius and the river of Zherebets. So most likely first the Russians will try to establish complete control over this territory. And if the Russians are able to do this, then this will allow the Russians to create a very powerful protection for the northern flank, while the main Russian forces would continue offensive operation in the southern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the city of Leman. The thing is that Ukrainians concentrated very powerful forces in the area of Barova. There is a third assault brigade Azov, which is very powerful. There is a 44th mechanized brigade. There is 66th, 67th presidential brigade. So there are very powerful forces in this area, and the Russians first of all want to be 100% sure that their flanks are secured before moving further in the direction of the city of Leman. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just several strikes with use of FAB 3000 on positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the most northern and the northwestern parts of the settlement, without any changes on the ground. Obviously, there are very heavy clashes, but as for now, we see that the Russians reduced their activities in this area. Probably the Russians are waiting for some progress on some other direction, or maybe the Russians are waiting when the Ukrainians, under the pressure of the Russian forces, would be forced to redeploy some forces from this area, let's say, in the direction of the city of Constantinovka or in the Pokrovsk direction. As for the northern directions, we have lots of interesting updates. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts to counterattack the Russians in the area of the settlement by the name of Belovody. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were counterattacking Russians in this area on the territory of the settlement, and probably this is one of the videos. So, telling the truth, since the beginning of 2025, Ukrainians almost haven't carried out even a single more or less normal counteroffensive operation. Just local counterattacks with the purpose to restore lost positions. And as for this video, we say that probably for the first time since the beginning of 2025, we received a video where we can see a very powerful and very, let's say, strong counterattack from the Ukrainian side. But this counterattack was repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered losses. They lost almost every single equipment that was involved in this offensive operation. And on the map, we can see several geolocations where the Russians were attacking Ukrainians. And most of the vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine were destroyed on their entrance to the village of Belovody. So Ukrainians tried to counterattack, but they couldn't do anything. Another important thing is that currently we can see a very huge concentration of Ukrainian forces along the border with Russian Federation, along the Bryansk and Kursk regions. In this video that was published by the Russian side, we can see lots of episodes how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the northeastern part of Ukraine. Lots of explosions, lots of FPV drone attacks, lots of artillery attacks, and all these updates, all these videos tell us just about one thing. Ukrainians most likely concentrated their forces in this pocket, and probably with the purpose to create another provocation during the May holidays. Very likely that Ukrainians will try to attack the territory of the Russian Federation in the very near future with the purpose to ruin Russian holidays on the 9th of May. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.